All right. Our goal, as always, is to get through an entire class with no technological issues. Today, we are looking at achieving spiritual perfection, counting the Omer. Thank you for those of you who are joining me live for this Lunch and Learn, and welcome to those of you who are watching this afterwards on YouTube or other streaming services. It's wonderful to have you all part of this class. So we begin with the Jewish story as, or the Jewish calendar as a story. We start off this season with Passover. Passover marks the end of slavery. It marks the beginning of salvation. It marks the beginning of freedom. And as we move forward towards Shavuot, which happens 1 week of weeks, that's 49 days, 7 times 7. If you remember your times tables, at least that's what they were called when I was a kid. Probably called something else now. If you remember your multiplication, 7 weeks times 7 days in a week is Shavuot. That's 49 days after after Passover has begun. And the holiday of Shavuot celebrates the revelation at Sinai. So you can imagine our ancestors leaving slavery in Egypt and for this period of 49 days making their way toward Har Sinai, towards Mount Sinai, towards this revelation in which we experience the presence of God right in our immediate lives, when our presence and God's presence meet and encounter. The Omer, then, this counting of these 49 days, is the journey in between them. So, how do we go from being slaves, being shackled to worldly concerns, into spiritual beings that are prepared to encounter God directly? How do we prepare ourselves? How do we go through this process of refinement and spiritual perfection so that we can be prepared to encounter God on Shavuot? That is the purpose of the Omer. We're going to begin this lesson with a blessing. For those of you who are joining live, or for those of you who are watching this before sundown, all of these blessings will be accurate and correct for today's date. For any of you who are joining us in the future, you may need to consult hebcal.org or reformjudaism.org or another website that lists and shows the date and the day of the Omer. So if you have already counted the Omer this morning, then you will not need to say these blessings. But if you have not yet counted the Omer this morning or last night, please say these blessings with me. Women are here at the top, men are at the bottom. Hebrew is a gendered language. Choose the one that best fits you. What can I say? Hinani mukhan u'mizuman lekayam mitzvat aseh shel Sephirat ha'omer. Behold, I am prepared and ready to perform the commandment of counting the Omer. We all say together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Sephirat ha'omer. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with mitzvot and commands us concerning the counting of the Omer. And now we actually, having said the blessing, we actually carry out the counting of the Omer. Hayom shisha asar yom shahem shnei shavuot u'shnei yamim laomer. And in parentheses in the Hebrew is Gibura Shabbat Tiferet, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Today is 16 days, which is 2 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. We always count the Omer in this way, by the way, dividing it up into weeks and days, because we are commanded to celebrate for a week of weeks, meaning it's not just the 49 days. The fact that it's 49 days is significant, but also the fact that it is 7 weeks is significant. It is this matrix where the individual day has its own individual significance, and also its place within the week has significance. This goes all the way back to the biblical commandment, although a lot of what we're looking at today emerges far after biblical times. When we're talking about mysticism, we're generally talking about the 12th century or later. There are, roots of mysticism that go back very early in Judaism. Uh, and whenever we're talking about those, I'll make sure to draw attention to that. But the type of mysticism that we're talking about here today is really a medieval and much of it a late medieval development. So let's talk about mysticism and the Omer. We start with this term, Sephirat HaOmer, which literally means counting the Omer, but it also shares this word. Sephirat is related to Sphirot. If you know anything about contemporary Jewish mysticism, about Kabbalah, you know that Sephirot are the 10 spheres that make up the individual components of the tree of life, the mystical symbol of the tree of life. So because of this relationship here between Sephirat, between counting the Omer, which is the commandment, and Sphirot, the spheres of the tree of life, this connection is made and these two ideas are linked together. In particular, because the number 7 is so significant in counting the Omer, we're paying attention to the lower 7 Sephirot, which correspond with 7 attributes of human beings. There are 10 Sephirot, you'll see in just a moment. The lower 7 on this diagram, the tree of life, it's not an object, it's not a place. You can't go and see the tree of life. You can't go up to heaven when you die and see, God has this design, printed out somewhere for you. It's not in a handout. It's a diagram. It's just like any diagram, it represents an abstract idea. But this diagram always shows 10 spheres, Sephirot, and they're always arranged in a particular order. The 7 lower Sephirot are attributes that human beings can develop, that human beings can embody, while the upper 3 are those which are reserved only for God. Only God has access to these upper 3 Sephirot. Here's the tree of life right here. You can see, probably the print is a little bit too small to see, but at the very top you have Keter, which is crown. You can see you have Bina and Chokhmah, which are understanding and wisdom, are these second 2 layers sort of right here. This is very easy to Google. If you Google the 10 Sephirot, or if you Google Tree of Life, Kabbalah, just be careful, don't get too far down a rabbit hole, because there's a lot of junk on the internet that really doesn't have a good perspective on this, but you'll be able to find, if you do an image search, something like this. I believe this particular one either comes from Habayit, which is a good source of contemporary Jewish thought, or comes from Open Sidur, which is another great source for contemporary Jewish thought. You can use either one of these, and whatever you find on those websites is going to be pretty reliable, modern, contemporary understanding of Judaism. These top 3 Sephirot, which make up God's crown or the Godhead, or however you would like to say it, are the types of keter, the types of kingship, the types of rulership, the types of wisdom and knowledge that are beyond the access of human beings, that we just don't have the capacity for in this world. The lower 7 Sephiroths are those which we do have access to. These are the spiritual aspects of ourselves that we can develop over the course of the year. This is an older diagram which shows the Sephiroth and shows how the human being and how God access different parts of the tree of life. So if we look at a calendar of the counting of the Omer, if we look at a calendar of the counting of the Omer, you might find something like this. This one does come from opensidura.org, which is a great resource for a lot of Jewish stuff that you can find there. You can pull this up and take a closer look. We're going to take a closer look in just a moment, sort of zoom in on this week. But what you see here are the 49 days arranged in 7 columns. Each column is 1 week, and each square is 1 day. So you might notice the first week, and this particular one is designed so that it reads from left to right, sort of English style. The very first one, you can see the number 1 in that purple circle. That would be the first day of the Omer. And then progressing down, you've got, let's say we started on a Monday, you've got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all the way back to Monday again. We didn't start on a Monday. This year we actually start on Shabbat, which is sort of an unusual situation, but there you have it. You've got so you've got here, or we start Motzei Shabbat, I should say, on Sunday. Each day of the week corresponds with one of these sort of horizontal grid lines as the weeks go up and down. So you would start with 1 and you would go all the way down to the bottom, and then the next week you go back up to the top, move on to the next week, all the way down, and so on and so forth until you've completed this counting. Some of the days are marked in special ways. Each of the Sephiroths is matched to 1 color. So week 1 is Chesed. That's everywhere that you see purple on here is represented by Chesed. And if you look at week 1 all the way down, you see on the outside ring in this diagram, you see purple representing Chesed. You can also see purple on the first day of each week in the center, representing Chesed within another Sephirah, within another attribute. So we're talking about 7 different spiritual aspects. We're not going to talk about all 7 of them, but we will talk about 2 of them today. But I want you to understand how these function. So each week has 1 theme, which is 1 particular Sephirah, 1 particular attribute that week is focused on all week. And during each of the days of that week, a different corresponding attribute is, and the relationship between these 2 is focused on for that day. So the very first day, which is purple inside of purple, you've got Chesed Sheba Chesed, Chesed within Chesed, which I'm going to leave untranslated at least for the moment, which means you're only focused on Chesed. The second day, if you look right below, you see purple on the outside, and within that Chesed, within that purple, you see blue for Gevurah, which means you're looking for the attribute of Gevurah as it is within the attribute of Chesed. Let's take a look, zoom in on just this week. This is now the third week of Sephiroth HaOmer. If it's 2 weeks plus 2 days, means we're 2 days into the third week. We haven't completed 3 weeks, but we're in the third week now. And we're specifically in the second day of the third week. So all this week we're focusing on Tiferet, which is, I'm going to translate now as beauty, although there are other aspects to it as well. Beauty, harmony, compassion. All of these concepts are mystical concepts and are difficult to translate in just one word. So I'll give you a set of words that each capture part of the idea of Tiferet, or any of these attributes we're talking about. So Tiferet on this diagram is represented by green. So you see green every single day. And on today, which is the second day, you see blue in the center. And you also see that it says Rosh Chodesh Iyar, because today is Rosh Chodesh. We didn't say the blessing for Rosh Chodesh because it's not the time of day that we say it. But if you have not said the blessing, then the next time you go to a prayer service, or if you haven't said it already leading up to Rosh Chodesh, then you'll say the blessing. You can say the blessing through today. That's another class for another time. Today, this week, we're looking at Tiferet, which is represented by beauty, glory. These are all different ways to translate the word Tiferet. Balance, harmony, compassion, equanimity. All of these words are different translations of Tiferet. That Tiferet doesn't mean any one of these, it means all of these simultaneously, and the place where all of these words overlap. That is Tiferet. If we're looking at the Sephiroths, you can see Tiferet right here in the middle. This is where we're located as we go through this calendar. So let's talk about Tiferet, about beauty. This famous quote from John Keats in his poem Ode to a Grecian Urn. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. How's that for a meditation on beauty? Now, a lot of people have heard this quote, but you might not know the full poem in context unless you've studied it in high school or college or whatever. There's a question, it's ambiguous, whether or not this is intended in a sincere way or whether it's meant with a touch of irony in this particular poem. It's ambiguous. Something that's a little bit less ambiguous is Lily Tomlin, who's a great American comedian, who responds, if truth is beauty, how come nobody gets their hair done in a library? Okay, so all these ideas about beauty is a hard thing to pin down, to really say this is beauty, because there's always going to be another perspective. Is beauty something objective, or is beauty in the eye of the beholder, that famous phrase that you may have heard? Well, that's one of these great philosophical discussions that goes all the way back thousands of years to the ancient Greeks, and certainly we see it taking place in the Talmud. What qualifies something as beautiful? What makes something beautiful? Whether it is something objective, that it is God-given, or whether it is something subjective. The idea in Judaism is that there are certain aspects of beauty which are inherent. That there is something beautiful about this phrase which takes this well-known quote and in a very pithy way recontextualizes it. We find beauty in poetry that amazingly, we may have different poets that we favor. You might like John Keats, you might like Yehuda Amichai, the great Israeli poet, uh, but we all seem to agree that poetry in general is a source of beauty. So here is Yehuda Amichai, the great Israeli poet. This is obviously translated from Hebrew. Uh, his poem, Lying in Wait for Happiness. I'll read it. I know it's probably, I'm not sure if it's large enough to see on your screen right now, but I'll read what it says. On the broad steps leading down to the western wall, a beautiful woman came up to me. You don't remember me. I'm Shoshana in Hebrew. Something else in other languages. All is vanity. Thus she spoke at twilight, standing between the destroyed and the built, between the light and the dark. Blackbirds and whitebirds changed places with the great rhythm of breathing. The flash of tourist cameras lit my memory too. What are you doing here, between the promised and forgotten, between the hoped for and the imagined? What are you doing here, lying in wait for happiness? With your lovely face, a tourist advertisement from God, and your soul rent and torn like mine. She answered me, my soul is rent and torn like yours, but it is beautiful because of that, like fine lace. I'll give you a moment to absorb that and contemplate just this final line. What is beauty? And how is beauty sometimes defying expectations? Beauty is not necessarily, when we talk about tiferet, when we talk about beauty, it is not necessarily physical beauty. We're talking about the aesthetics of a whole person, about what gives a person inner beauty, and how very often inner beauty is reflected in outer beauty. That some people can be so beautiful on the outside until we see how ugly they are on the inside, at which point they no longer look beautiful. And just the opposite, somebody can have such overwhelming inner beauty that we sense it just by being around them. This is what we're talking about, developing beauty, making the world a more beautiful place. We have a concept in Judaism called Hidul Mitzvah, which is to make a mitzvah more beautiful. If you have a Kiddush cup at home, if you have a Seder plate, if you have a mezuzah on your door, chances are it's not just a simple utilitarian, basic shape, dollar store case for your mezuzah, cup for your wine, plate for your Seder. Chances are it was created with some kind of artistry because it is a reflection of our values. When you have something beautiful, if you have a beautiful home, that reflects that you really care about your home, really cares about what your home stands for, about having a stable place for your family, about the family values of having a home. If you have a beautiful car, that says something else about your priorities. If you have beautiful clothing, that says something else about your priorities. If you have a beautiful mezuzah, that says something about your priorities. A beautiful Kiddush cup, that says something about your priorities. Beauty is something that communicates something much deeper about our intentions in the world. Now, within beauty, today we're looking at Gevurah. How do we translate Gevurah? Very, very different concept. It might even seem at odds at times with the idea of Tiferet, of beauty and compassion and harmony. Gevurah can be translated as discipline, strength, might, restraint. justice, discernment. These are all different translations of Gevurah. Gevurah is not any one of these. It is where all of these overlap in one concept. That concept is Gevurah. What does the Talmud say about Gevurah, about strength? We find in the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, chapters of the fathers, or however you want to translate it, Pirkei Avot. Ben Zoma said, "Who is mighty? One who subdues their passions." What is strength? Strength is the ability to limit oneself and to limit one's passions, to have self-control, self-determination, and individual, personal, inner strength. Proverbs in the Tanakh from the Bible says, "Better to be slow to anger than mighty, to rule one's spirit than to take a city." It takes more strength to rule one's own spirit than to conquer a city. This is what Gevurah is referring to. It's not physical strength. It's not the ability to force your will on others. It's not the ability to bend the world to your will. It's about the inner strength and discipline that God requires of us. Here's from the Midrash, from Genesis Rabbah. We have Bereshit Rabbah, however you prefer. We have this parable of a king. There was a king who had delicate glass cups. He said to himself, "If I pour hot water in them, they will expand and burst." Maybe you've seen this before. Maybe you've made that mistake in your own kitchen at some point in your past. You know, if you have very fragile glass and you pour boiling hot water into it, it can break the glass. "If I pour cold water into them, they will contract and shatter." Same thing. Sometimes you put ice in a glass and you add the water and the glass breaks. You've seen this happen. So what did he do? He mixed the hot water with the cold and poured it into them, and they did not break. In this parable, who is the king? What is the glass cup? This delicate glass cup. What is the hot water and what is the cold water? What does it mean for those to be mixed together? If you're watching on YouTube, you can send me an email. You can get in touch with me. You can also give me a call. I'm very easy to get a hold of. I would love to talk about your thoughts on this, or you can post it in the comments right on the video. What you think the king is, the cup, the hot water, and the cold water. If you're joining me live, don't go anywhere. We still have a few minutes, and I want to hear your answers to this right now.